everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into the world of habits
Habits.
with James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Yeah. Atomic Habits.
Have
It's a good one.
you read this one?
Oh, yeah. I'm a big fan of this book. I mean, it's not just about, like, breaking bad habits. It's about understanding those systems that are already there and then using that to build a better life,
Okay.
sort of brick by tiny brick.
I love that analogy. But I have to admit, when I first heard the title Atomic Habits, I was kind of picturing something microscopic, like almost insignificant.
Right.
And then I read Clear's personal story
Oh, yeah.
and talk about the power of small wins over time.
Oh, his story is incredible.
Right.
To go from, like, a life-threatening injury on the baseball field to where he is today, that right there just throws any excuse out the window
Right.
about not having enough time.
Exactly. And this isn't some self-help guru who's always had it easy.
Right.
We're talking broken bones, facial fractures, the works.
Yeah, he was in a medically induced coma, couldn't even walk straight for months.
And yet he not only recovers, but becomes an academic. All-American, builds a successful business, writes a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah, it's really something.
It really makes you think anything is possible.
Yeah.
So how does he do it?
Well, it all comes down to what he calls the habit feedback loop.
Okay.
And he really emphasizes this idea that we can't change something we don't understand.
Okay.
So he breaks down how habits actually work on like a neurological level.
So walk us through this loop.
Okay.
The cue, the craving, the response, the reward.
Yeah.
I feel like we hear these terms a lot.
But
how do they actually play out in our daily lives?
Well, let's break it down.
Okay.
So imagine this. Your phone buzzes on the table.
Okay.
That buzz, that's the cue.
Okay.
It's a trigger that tells your brain to anticipate something.
And usually because our phones are associated with some kind of notification, right?
Exactly.
So our brain starts anticipating a potential reward,
Yeah,
which triggers the craving.
exactly. That craving is that feeling of like, ooh, who texted me? What notification did I get? Or even just like the enjoyment of satisfying your curiosity.
Yes,
You know.
totally.
It's like, ooh, what is it?
I gotta know.
Yeah.
So you pick up the phone and you check it.
Right.
That's the response.
Yeah, the habit in action.
A habit in action.
And then, of course, comes the reward. Finding out who texted, reading that notification.
Yeah.
Maybe laughing at a funny meme.
The dopamine hit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that reward, that reinforces the entire cycle,
Right.
making it more likely that you'll repeat it the next time your phone buzzes.
It's like our brains are wired to seek out those little hits of dopamine.
They are.
And that's how a simple action, like just checking your phone, can turn into this deeply ingrained habit
Totally.
without us even realizing it.
It's crazy, right?
It is. It's powerful.
Yeah. And that's exactly why understanding this loop is so important.
Okay.
Because once you see how it works, you can start to like consciously design your environment
Yes.
and your routine to make those good habits more inevitable
Okay.
and bad habits invisible.
So how do we even become aware of our existing habits?
Right.
Especially those mindless automatic ones we do without even thinking.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Well, Clear suggests this thing called the habit scorecard.
Habits scorecard. Okay.
Yeah, and it actually reminded me of this fascinating example he gives about the Japanese railway system,
Okay.
which you wouldn't think they'd be like at the forefront of habit design,
Interesting.
but they kind of are.
I know it seems so simple, yet so powerful.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this habit scorecard and how it relates to trains.
Okay, so Clear talks about how Japanese railway workers use this method called point and call.
Point and call.
Point and call to reduce errors.
Okay.
And they basically verbally call out each step of their routine.
Wow.
Like signal is green proceeding, making their actions more deliberate
Interesting.
and reducing the chance of mistakes.
It's amazing how such a simple practice can have such a huge impact on
Aren't-
safety.
It's powerful.
Yeah.
And that's precisely what the habit scorecard encourages us to do in our own lives.
Okay.
It's like bringing those unconscious routines to the surface,
Okay.
like holding up a mirror to our automatic behaviors.
So how does this habits scorecard actually work?
Yeah.
Do you just like sit down with a notepad and track every single thing you do in a day?
Yeah.
Because that sounds exhausting.
It does sound exhausting.
It's not about tracking every little thing. It's more about noticing the patterns, right? Like,
Mhm.
okay, every afternoon around 3 p.m., I wandered to the kitchen for a snack.
Exactly. You're identifying those automatic routines.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you've identified a habit you want to change, Clear's 4 laws of behavior change can help you make it happen.
Okay, so let's unpack those laws. The first one is make it obvious. It sounds pretty self explanatory, but what does it actually mean in practice?
Think of it like this. If you want to drink more water, don't keep your water bottle tucked away in the cupboard. Make it visible. Put it on your desk, in your bag, anywhere you'll see it constantly.
So it's about creating visual cues that remind you of the habit you're trying to build. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say.
And there's another powerful technique he calls implementation intentions. Instead of just saying, I'll exercise more, get specific. Say, I'll go for a walk every day after lunch, or I'll hit the gym every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 a.m.
It's like setting a predetermined time and place for the habit, so you're less likely to make excuses when the moment comes. It's in the calendar.
Exactly. Now, the second law, make it attractive, taps into the power of dopamine, that feel-good neurochemical that's all about motivation and reward.
You know how you get that little thrill when you check off a to-do list item? That's dopamine giving you a high five. So, is Clear suggesting we hack this system to our advantage?
Precisely. If we can find a way to make a habit enjoyable or link it to something we already enjoy, we're far more likely to stick with it. Pair your workout with your favorite playlist or reward yourself with a relaxing bath after a productive work session. Find what works for you.
It's not all about individual pleasure, though, right? Clear also talks about the influence our social circles have on our habits.
Absolutely. Humans are social creatures, and we're naturally drawn to behaviors that are considered normal within our social groups. We even see it in the animal kingdom. We're wired to imitate, especially those we admire.
He tells this fascinating story about Laszlo Polgar, a Hungarian chess coach who raised his three daughters to be chess prodigies by surrounding them with chess, making it an inevitable part of their lives. It's incredible what a supportive and encouraging environment can do.
It's a perfect example of how we can leverage social influence to our advantage. Surround yourself with people who support your goals and make healthy habits a part of your social life. Join a running club. Find a writing buddy. It makes a world of difference.
So we've made the habit obvious and attractive, but how do we ensure it actually sticks? That's where make it easy, the third law, comes in.
This one is all about reducing friction. Instead of trying to meditate for an hour straight, start with just 5 minutes. Instead of overhauling your entire diet, focus on swapping out one unhealthy meal a day.
I love that. Small, manageable changes are so much less intimidating than these huge life-altering shifts. Is that where the 2-minute rule comes in?
Exactly. Break down habits into their simplest form and focus on mastering those first 2 minutes. Once those 2 minutes become effortless, you can gradually increase the duration or intensity.
It's about building momentum and proving to yourself that you can stick to something even when it's hard.
It reminds me of how Japanese companies like Sony and Toyota revolutionized industries in the 1970s by relentlessly eliminating wasted effort in their manufacturing processes. They made things easy, efficient, and repeatable, and look at the success they achieved.
Okay, so we've made the habit obvious, attractive, and easy. But what about the reward? If it's not satisfying, why would we bother repeating it? That's where make it satisfying, the fourth and final law, comes in.
This one's crucial because it taps into our brain's preference for immediate gratification. We're wired to seek out those quick hits of dopamine, which is why it's so easy to reach for that cookie, even when we know it's not the healthiest choice.
So how do we make good habits, which often have delayed rewards, feel as satisfying as those instant gratification activities?
It's about finding ways to make those good habits immediately satisfying. That might be as simple as creating a visual tracker to monitor your progress, giving yourself a small reward after completing a task, or even just acknowledging and celebrating your wins.
I remember Clear talked about the Safeguard soap study in Pakistan where they dramatically increased hand washing just by making it more enjoyable. They gave out this soap with a pleasant scent and lather, and people loved using it so much that hand washing skyrocketed.
It's amazing how a simple tweak can make such a big difference. It's not just about hygiene, though, is it? It's a perfect example of how our brains respond to pleasure and reward. By making a habit enjoyable, we're essentially rewiring our brains to crave it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like tricking our brains into choosing the healthy option because it feels good, not because we're forcing ourselves to do something we don't enjoy.
Exactly. It's all about working with our brains, not against them. But we can't stop at just making good habits stick, can we? There's a whole other level to this, mastering a skill, pushing past good enough. What does Clear say about that?
I was wondering that myself. We've talked about building the foundation, but what about taking it to the next level?
Well, he introduces this fascinating concept called the Goldilocks rule.
Yeah.
It's this idea that we experience peak motivation when we're working on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities.
So, not too hard that we get discouraged, but not too easy that we get bored. It's about finding that sweet spot where we're challenged just enough to keep us engaged and growing.
Precisely. Imagine you're learning to play the guitar. If you stick to strumming the same three chords over and over, you'll eventually plateau. But if you jump straight into playing Bach, you'll probably get frustrated and give up.
It's about finding that piece of music that's just challenging enough to push your skills, but not so difficult that it becomes overwhelming.
Exactly. And this applies to any skill, whether it's writing, coding, or even learning a new language. The key is to constantly calibrate your efforts, finding that sweet spot where you're stretching your abilities without breaking.
That makes a lot of sense. But there's something else that often gets in the way of mastery, something that Clear doesn't shy away from boredom. He actually encourages us to embrace it.
He does. He talks about how the difference between those who achieve mastery and everyone else often comes down to who can handle the boredom of doing the same thing over and over, even when it's not exciting.
It's like that quote, amateurs practice until they get it right, professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. It's about showing up consistently, even when the work feels mundane.
He tells this great story about an elite weightlifting coach who said that the best athletes aren't necessarily the strongest or the fastest. They're the ones who can handle the monotony of training day after day, pushing through those moments when it feels tedious.
It's about building that discipline to stick with the process, even when it's not glamorous or exciting, because you understand that the real rewards come from that consistent, dedicated effort over time.
It's about playing the long game, focusing on those tiny improvements that, over time, compound into something truly extraordinary.
This deep dive has been incredible. We've gone from understanding the science of how tiny habits form to exploring practical strategies for building better ones. We've talked about making them obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, all while working with our brains, not against them.
And we've gone even further, discussing how to push past good enough and strive for mastery by embracing the Goldilocks rule, and, perhaps surprisingly, the importance of boredom.
It's been a fascinating journey into the power of small changes, and it all started with that one simple concept, atomic habits. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. What's one tiny change you can make today? Something so small it almost feels insignificant that, if repeated consistently over the next year, could have a profound impact on your life.
That's a powerful question, and it's one we hope this deep dive has equipped you to answer.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those atomic habits building.